Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Well, they have got him finally, trapped like John Dillinger outside the Biograph Theater by the G-Men. Democrats announced today that they have finally obtained proof, concrete and irrefutable proof, that the president is in fact a secret Russian agent.
This president seems to be putting Russia's interests ahead of our own.
The evidence suggests, indeed, Trump has been a pawn of the Russians.
Don Lemon has it nailed. As we told you last night, you could have seen this coming. The FBI suspected it for some time. The Bureau opened a criminal investigation into the president more than a year ago on the grounds that no loyal American would fire a leader as impressive as FBI Director Jim Comey. Putin must have ordered it. The Washington Post concurred with this. As one of that paper's columnists noted, Trump has also, quote, endorsed populism. That's right. Populism. That is the stink of Russia all over it. It smells like vodka and day-old herring. So people in Washington have had their suspicions for years now, but now we know for certain, and we know because of a stunning New York Times piece today. In it, current and former administration officials, speaking, of course, from behind the protective veil of anonymity, because honestly, you don't know what the KGB or whatever it's called these days is capable of doing to people who tell the truth. But they nevertheless divulged that on multiple occasions over the last year, the president has privately floated the idea of pulling the United States out of NATO. Let that sink in. Leaving NATO. This is a huge story. Or it would have been a huge story in 1983 when the Soviet Union still existed and it was still clear what the point of NATO was. NATO, you remember, was created to keep the Soviets from invading Western Europe, and NATO did a very good job of that all the way until the very day the Soviet Union collapsed. That was the summer of 1991. It was almost 28 years ago. Vladimir Putin runs Russia now. He does not plan to invade Western Europe. He can't. So why do we still have NATO? Well, nobody really knows. In Washington, you're definitely not allowed to ask. And that's a shame because it would be an interesting conversation. Remaining in NATO comes with significant obligations. In the 1990s, our leaders decided it would be a wise idea to promise countries like Latvia and Estonia that we would use nuclear weapons to protect them if they ever had a problem with Russia. Why did we do that? Well, who knows? The details are lost to history. But the point is, we did that. Article 5 obligates the United States to protect any NATO ally that is threatened. So how do we feel about that now? Are you ready to launch a nuclear war over Latvia? What do you think of sending your kids to defend the territorial integrity of Estonia? Our foreign policy establishment thinks it's well worth it. In fact, under our current rules of membership in NATO, we would have no choice. You might not have known that. All of this might merit a national debate of some sort at some point when we're ready 28 years in. But no, the left isn't into national debates anymore. They're into screaming and threats and criminal investigation and other forms of coercion. They like things the way they are in this country. They're benefiting hugely from the status quo, and they don't like being challenged. They consider asking difficult questions a criminal act. Just this morning, in fact, Preet Bharara, he's the most famous former federal prosecutor in the country, explained this view on Twitter. He said this, quote, "If true, Trump should immediately and publicly state his apparent wish to withdraw from NATO so he can be promptly impeached, convicted, and removed from office," unquote. In other words, talking about leaving NATO isn't simply unwise, according to our leaders. It's an impeachable offense. Lots of famous and powerful people in Washington think this. Watch.
Withdrawing from NATO, even discussion about withdrawing from NATO, I think would be disastrous for the security.
I think that act would be so destructive to our country. It would be a ground for some profound effort by our part, whether it's impeachment or the 25th Amendment. He can't do that to this country. And I don't believe that he can do it without Senate ratification.
Did you catch that? The 25th Amendment. In other words, according to a sitting member of Congress, someone who's there right now, rethinking membership in NATO isn't just treasonous and criminal, though obviously it is. It's also prima facie evidence of insanity. You're not fit to govern if you say that. You probably shouldn't drive a car, just in the interest of public safety. So whatever happened to the old Democratic Party? When did the anti-war people become florid neocons? When did it become the party of Bill Kristol and Max Boot and every other discredited hack still trying to replicate the Iraq disaster in nations around the world? Who knows when that happened, but that's exactly what the Democratic Party is today. Just ask Tulsi Gabbard. Gabbard is a Democratic member of Congress. She's now running for president. On most questions, she's a conventional liberal. She represents Hawaii, after all. Of course she is. But on the question of Syria, she's skeptical. Gabbard isn't eager to overthrow the Assad government. Why? Well, because she worries about what might come next, what might happen to the Christians, the many other religious minorities who live there. For saying that, for holding that position, she is being denounced today by the left as a monster. Just this morning, the Daily Beast tried to link her to David Duke, literally. The dumb people on TV are mad, too. Watch them.
She went in 2017, Gloria, this is going to be another issue, to visit with Bashar al-Assad in Syria. And this trip has already come back to bite her. She did apologize for this.
She did, but, you know, how many apologies can you make for bad judgment? Not only will she be criticized inside the Democratic Party, but I think it makes her a less effective candidate. I mean, you know, she can't position herself against Trump about meeting with dictators when, in fact, she's done it herself. So, you know, I think she has some, I think she's going to have some problems.
That's the new standard in Washington, just so you know. Let's be crystal clear about this. You were not allowed to meet with foreign dictators. It's immoral. In fact, it might be treason. It could trigger the 25th Amendment, unless it's, I don't know, Xi Jinping of China. Yes, the Chinese government murders its political opponents. Yes, it has put Muslims in concentration camps. Yes, they're languishing in those camps right now. But it's not a huge deal to meet with the Chinese. The former governor of California, Jerry Brown, met with Xi just 2 years ago. He praised him as a leader in the fight against global climate change, even though China is, of course, by far the world's biggest polluter. But whatever. He may be a dictator, but he's a progressive dictator. And the left is not against those. It's definitely for those. In fact, they're role models, in case you haven't figured it out. David Tafuri is a lawyer and former foreign policy advisor to the Obama campaign, and he joins us tonight. Old enough to remember when it was the party of peace, now the party of mandatory war. So I'm just wondering, why shouldn't we have a debate about Article 5 in NATO, which obligates the United States and all members of NATO to defend the interests of other states? So why should we be on the hook for the territorial integrity of Estonia and Latvia? Seriously.
There's nothing wrong with having a debate. We're going to have one right now. I hope it'll be educational. It's important to note that NATO has been successful in the past as a military and intelligence sharing alliance, and also as an alliance of like-minded countries. You admitted that in your opening, that NATO was successful in defeating the Soviet Union, right?
Yes.
Now, NATO is still needed. History repeats itself. Putin's Russia is not the same as the Soviet Union, but it's trying to do some of the same things. It's trying to stamp out rule of law. It doesn't believe in freedom. It doesn't believe in free markets. It's trying to spread a vision of a kleptocracy that will enrich Putin and enrich the other oligarchs. That's what they have in Russia, and they're trying to spread it to the rest of Europe.
That's right. I mean, but how is that different from China? Only in that it's less effective. So I don't think that Russia has taken over Africa or Latin America yet, or the Caribbean. China has.
Well,
but it's totally fine. It's totally fine to get rich from sucking up to Chinese oligarchs. Our whole ruling class does. But it's wrong not to defend Latvia against Putin, because why?
No, you're right. I mean, NATO is also an alliance that's aligned against China in many ways as well.
Really?
So comparing Russia to China doesn't somehow make what Russia's doing okay.
No. What you're describing, you're trying to explain why it's in America's vital interest to start a nuclear war to defend Latvia.
No, I did not say that.
Well, that's what we'd be obligated to do.
It's in America's vital interest to defend other countries around the world that are trying to become democracies, that are trying to promote freedom, that are trying to promote individual rights. They're trying to protect human rights and, most importantly, protect rule of law. That's what Latvia, the other Baltic states that have joined NATO successfully are doing, and we should encourage that by extending that security umbrella to them, which is what NATO has done.
So in other words, our kids get to die for Latvia because it somehow protects the rule of law for them to do that. And I'm just asking, does the average American understand that we're on the hook for this? I think that's a real question, which is trying to be ignored. They're trying to shut down the conversation.
You have to look at history. If Latvia and the other Baltic states fall to an aggressive Russia, ultimately other countries in Europe will fall. And ultimately, it will come back to us anyway, just like World War II. It's these same arguments people made against in favor of not doing anything against Germany and the Nazis in World War II. The exact same argument you just made is what pacifists argue.
I'm not actually making that argument.
Yes, you are.
The Nazis don't exist, and neither does the Soviet Union. I'm making an argument rooted in 2019, which is where we are right now. And I'm interested, very interested, since you brought it up, in what Western European countries do you think are at threat of being invaded by Russia?
Well, certainly the countries that have recently joined NATO, the Baltic states are a threat. That's why you brought them up.
But
other countries that are not yet part of NATO, other countries that are not yet part of NATO.
The core of Western Europe.
Okay, Ukraine is not part of NATO yet, right?
Ukraine
but the
was
reason
part of the Soviet Union when I got married, like 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, but it wanted to be free, and now it is free.
Lots of people want to be free. I'm just saying,
and it deserves to be free.
But in Western Europe, what countries, the core countries of Western Europe, NATO exist? Poland is not a core country in Western Europe. Not to bring you back to, and I like Poland.
Okay, so you're willing to cede all of Eastern Europe,
I'm not willing to cede
even the countries like Poland that are allies that are part of NATO, and say we should only protect Western Europe?
I'm asking
because
you sincerely,
once Eastern Europe goes, then Western Europe is threatened.
Okay, so you think there's I just want to. We're almost done. You think there's a plausible threat within our lifetimes of, say, the UK, Germany, Belgium, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal being invaded by Russia?
I am not saying that, but what I'm saying is
what you were saying.
If all of the other countries in Eastern Europe, including the ones that have joined NATO, fell, then of course the next frontier for Russia expansionism would be Western Europe.
Right. So first they came for
obvious,
Latvia.
I think.
Yeah. Not obvious at all to me, but keep trying. Great to see you, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
Christian Whiton was the State Department senior advisor for the George W. Bush and Trump administrations, and he joins us tonight. When did Bill Kristol take over the Democratic Party? Did you notice when that happened?
Yeah, it's amazing the turn when this group that used to be very reticent in committing the lives of American, the blood, the treasure of the United States to, frankly, other people's problems, now seem to be more hawkish than the neocons were in the Iraq War.
Do you think your average Democratic voter is on board with that? Do you think the average Democrat even in California, Vermont, and very liberal places, is up for having a war over the freedom-yearning people of Estonia? Seriously.
Well, it's more than, one thing about the Baltics, they still have some fight in them, and at least they meet their pledge almost of spending 2% of GDP on defense. But look at the expansion of NATO more broadly. We've put Montenegro in there recently. People want to put Georgia, the nation of Georgia, on the complete other side of the Black Sea, a sea into which we are prohibited from putting any significant military, any significant naval power. I mean, the expansion wants to go on. What we heard from your last guest is a desperate search for a new mission for an alliance that is completely obsolete and which, frankly, succeeded almost 2 decades ago.
I'd be happy for a new mission. I would just like to know what it is. I'm not against NATO. I'm not making an argument for disbanding NATO. I mean, if we can do something useful with it, that sounds great. But I just think maybe we should reorient from 1945. Why do you think it is that the new democratic orthodoxy mandates that we keep troops in Syria forever, and anybody who disagrees with that is, as the Daily Beast pointed out today, somehow allied with David Duke? Where did that idea come from?
This comes just from the yellow fever over Russia, the idea that Donald Trump is a sleeper agent for Russia, that Russia, as your last guest pointed out, seems poised to, invade Western Europe the same way Hitler did in 1945. None of that is true. If you look at Russia today, it has gotten away with a couple of fast ones. It's focused on places where you have large Russian populations and taken small parts of Ukraine and Georgia. Putin's a bad guy. His economy is $1.7 trillion. Europe's, which can afford to defend itself, $17 trillion. Ours is 21. Russia does not pose a serious nation-state threat. It has nuclear weapons. It can do a lot of damage. But again, this is just, one thing that really cracked me up about your last guest, the idea that NATO would have our back if we had to fight China, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, where approval of America is at 38%, or Germany, where only 30% of people have a favorable view of the United States. They're going to help us confront China. They're actually a huge distraction from deterring China.
Why do you think we never have these debates? I mean, it's supposed to be a democracy. Shouldn't the public have some sense of what their obligations are under these treaties? I don't think people do.
Right. No, it's, and it's funny. You see senators get up and preen about their prerogatives. They have the prerogative to declare war. Why are they never consulted? But they haven't had serious debates about that. And if you look, it's both Democrats and Republicans up there who go off the deep end when Donald Trump does simple things like say, hey, maybe Europe ought to spend a little more. Maybe it should meet the very modest obligation it has. So it's really a foreign policy establishment in Washington. It's neither really Republican or Democrat. It's androgynous. All of these people agree. All of these people love doing diplo-tourism where they get to go over Europe and wax poetic about 1945 or 1989. But it's not a serious realignment or recognition that we have to make choices. We can't be everything to everyone. Even with a giant defense budget, $717 billion, right. We need to decide who the real threats are.
Couldn't be a less impressive group of people from what I've noticed, I would say. Christian, thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.